Hi, my name's Pat Smith. Like a lot of you, I've been making masks, and I was frustrated that they didn't fit everyone. I did learn that you can make a little slip knot in your elastic and change the size of the elastic. So I'm going to show you how to make a mask with this slip knot elastic. It will fit any adult. Start out with two pieces of fabric, 6.5 by 9.5 inches each. Use two different fabrics to avoid contamination. You want to have the same side against your face at all times. I like to use batik. It doesn't ravel. It's very, very densely woven. Another nice thing about batik is that it does not have a front and a back, so you can just sew it however you want. I also recommend that you use two fabrics who can accommodate the same color thread, because you will be top stitching and it's just a lot easier if the thread looks good on both sides. If you're going to give these to other people or sell them, I recommend that you have one side that's just kind of boring and one side that's more interesting. That way people won't get confused about which side they want to put against their face. They'll make a choice and they'll stick with it. You'll need those two pieces of fabric and 4 pieces of 7-inch elastic. So just cut elastic 7 inches long. If you're making a lot of masks and you want to cut several elastics at a time, you can make a little 7-inch piece of cardboard, wrap it around as many times as you can comfortably hold, and then simply cut the top and the bottom. You'll need some pins and a way to mark something on the seam allowance of your mask. Also, you need a good hot iron. I use a hot steam iron. On my sewing machine, I have a walking presser foot. It's actually a small walking presser foot that acts like a continuous feed. So if you have continuous feed on your sewing machine, you want to use that. If not, a walking presser foot is pretty much needed, especially in the pleating step. You'll need a wire in part of your mask so that people can shape this around their nose. This is a 22 gauge wire used by florists. It has a couple advantages. It doesn't rust like a pipe cleaner might rust, and it's a good, the 22 gauge makes it stiff but not too stiff. Now you need 6 inches of it. The end will poke right through your fabric if you don't treat it. So I use these pliers, which are made for jewelry making, and curl that end in to make a loop on each side. Now sometimes that end that you've curled will snag for you, so I use these flat pliers and flatten it out so that I don't have any hook grabbing anything. If you just flatten it over, it will still be too thin and it will stab through your fabric and it can jam into your machine, also poke somebody's face. So you want to have a curl of some kind. The first step is to sew one long seam. So put your 2 pieces of fabric together, use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That will give you plenty of fabric as you catch the final step on your top stitching. And that needs to be pressed open and then pressed closed with a nice crisp seam. You won't be this meticulous about everything, but this is the seam where the wire goes. And it's very, very helpful to have that nice crisp seam all ready to go. Once that's sewn and pressed down, open and down, you need to let it cool down. That'll help set it. Once it's cooled down, you'll open it back up and put right sides together again. Keep that seam allowance right here and mark it for your wire. You're going to make a little tunnel that wire is going to live in, and it needs to have a wall on each end. You can mark this any way you need to with a pencil, or I like to use the end of a piece of soap. This is why I can use so much of it, because it's just going to wash out. Open this up. I lift that up, and there's the back of the mask. And I pin my elastic to it, leaving the seam allowance up here. I do not include that pin in the seam allowance. So I tuck that first piece of elastic right up against the seam that I've just done and pin it. You will never be sewing over pins. Second elastic on that side is just put in place to move later. So you just put it there so that it doesn't hop around in the center of your mask. And do the same thing on the other side. Depending on if you're left or right-handed, it will be harder on one side because you need to have the end of your pins on the outside of your mask. As you're sewing it, you won't be able to grab a pin from the inside. So put all 4 of your pins in place. Finally, close your mask and put 1 pin in the center just to keep it down. You won't be sewing in this area. You want to leave a nice big hole, about 3 inches. You'll have about 9.5 inches to work with here, so leave a nice size hole. Okay, now you're ready to sew your mask. First thing you'll do is make the tunnel for that wire. On the line that you've created, sew down. You don't even have to start at the edge, but start part way down that seam allowance and sew just to the seam. Do not go into that seam and back up. Then lift your presser foot, turn your work, and you will be sewing 1/4 of an inch from the seam you just put in. In my case, I've got a presser foot that tells me exactly where I am. No one else is ever going to see this seam if it isn't perfect. Drive clear down to that other mark you've made and stop with your needle down. Lift your presser foot, and you're going to put your wire into the tunnel. I find it's helpful, take that little loop that I've made and face it toward the seam, otherwise sometimes it gets caught on the needle. But just lift up that top part of the seam allowance, put your wire to the left of your needle, and it will really have no choice but to go into the tunnel. You can't push it all the way because the presser foot's in your way. From the back, reach behind your needle and you'll find that hoop that you've made in your wire, and just pull it back to the end of the tunnel, to the wall. You'll know that. But once it hits that wall, your needle's down, your presser foot's up, move your work and create that last wall. Again, go just to the seam and then put it in reverse and go back. Do this nice and slowly for 2 reasons. You don't want to go past your seam, and you do not want to sew over wire and break your needle. Now you're ready to sew your mask together. You'll start on that bottom seam, sewing towards the corner. About 2.5, 3 inches from the edge, back tack a few stitches, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then stop 1/2 inch from the edge. Needle down, presser foot up, turn your work. Pull back on that top fabric and you'll see your elastic there waiting for you. Grab it with pliers or your fingers and then push it down to be flush with the seam you've just sewn. Use your left hand to push it nice and even. Lower your presser foot. You need to really sew this, so go forward, backward, and forward over that elastic. Take it up to the top. Take your pin out before you hit it, and sew over the elastic and back over it again backwards. Okay, you want to do exactly the same thing on the other side, which requires you to turn your work over and work from the other side. Again, about 2.5, 3 inches from the edge, a few stitches backward, 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then forward, stop 1/2 inch from the edge. Needle down, presser foot up, turn your work, and expose that first piece of elastic, which needs to be pushed down in place, just flush with the seam you've just sewn. Now go forward, backward, and forward over that elastic. Come up to the top, take out your pin, and sew forward and backward over that top elastic. Your mask is all sewn. Trim off any threads that are in the way. I do not trim the corners at all. I like them to be nice and strong, and you have elastic in every corner, so it's very easy to make a nice crisp corner. Leave your corners alone. You've got to take out that last pin. You've got a nice big hole to turn it right side out. Your wire will give you some problems, but it'll just have to go through. Best way to turn this right side out is just pull on your elastic. You'll need to give that wire seam a little bit of attention. Just pinch it and straighten it out as much as you can. And I like to finger press the part that has been used as our hole. Your mask is ready to press. Simply put it on the ironing board, press it with a hot steam iron. The mask is now about 5.5 inches on each side in width. So you want it to be about 2.5 or 3 inches. Basically, you want to take 3 nice big 1-inch pleats into your mask. Start out with your mask right side up, the wire towards you. You're going to start on the right side, on the bottom. So make a pleat, start 1/4 inch from each edge. So you're going to have 1/4 inch top stitching clear around, and you're going to back up. Don't go clear to the edge, but back up to 1/4 inch from the edge, and then start going forward and grabbing your pleats as you make them. You'll line your pleats, they'll just actually line right up next to one another. As one ends, another one starts. Come to the top, leave your needle down, raise your presser foot, and turn your work. Now this top seam, which has the wire in there, you're not going to be able to sew exactly 1/4 inch away. You also are going to have a hard time sewing that completely even because your wire is in there and it'll fight you on some places. Just do your best and don't break your needle. Come to the edge, 1/4 inch away, leave your needle down, raise your presser foot and turn your work. Now on this case, you're going to be taking those pleats and pressing them towards you. In other words, down from the wire of the mask. On the other side, you went up. So these pleats are going down. You can always kind of look on the other side of your mask and see if this pleat is going to match the other one. Believe me, no one's going to be measuring your pleats. Go to the end, 1/4 inch away, leave your needle down, press your foot up, turn your work. Now you're going to close the hole. Just take it 1/4 inch from the edge and come to the end. Then I back stitch 1/4 inch away, so I never do go to the end of that mask. I've started 1/4 inch away on both sides. Now it's all done. Just trim everything nice and tight. Nothing's going to ravel out. You've got everything back stitched. All you need to do now is tie the slip knots in the elastic. This is something I had to look on YouTube to learn to do, so it might take a little practice, but it's not hard. The best way I remember is that I'm tying something around a pole, and the pole does not participate. So take one of I take the left hand one as my pole. I take the right hand elastic and go in front of it, then under, up over, and down through the loop I've just created. I try to have the end of my knots facing down toward the mask. Hold that with your other hand. Try not to have a great big end and tighten it. All right, now your other piece, the piece of elastic you just tied, it becomes your pole, and the other one is tied around it. Same way, go under, come up over it, and then down through towards your mask. Hold it and tighten it, and it will move up and down. Remember, people can take these out, or they might come out in the wash. They can always be retied.